3 p.m, Tuesday, 3rd of October 2017, Altona, Victoria. The last engine ever built on Australian soil rolls off the Toyota Motor Corporation Australia production line. A 2AR FE, 2.5 litres, 133 kilowatts, 4 cylinders, iron block, alloy head. The 2,535,963rd engine to leave the Altona plant across 16 years of production, 75 years, 11 months and 6 days after the first Australian-built Twin Wasp aero engine rolled off the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation production line at Lidcombe, New South Wales, on the 28th of October, 1941. The Australian engine industry ends. Not because the market rejected it, not because the engineers forgot how, not because the tooling wore out. Because 8 Australian Prime Ministers across 4 decades and 4 parties deliberately, sequentially, and with full documentation in the parliamentary Hansard, pulled the country out of engine manufacturing. If you ever worked the Ford Geelong engine plant, apprenticed on the Fisherman's Bend V8 line, or ran a Barra 6 through Alpine passes at 3 in the morning, hit subscribe. This channel keeps these stories alive. Chapter 1. The Last Engine. The workers on the Altona engine line know what today is. They have known for 3 years, 7 months and 23 days, since the 10th of February 2014, when Toyota Australia announced the closure. They have watched the shift patterns thin. They have watched the apprentice pipeline stop. They have watched their neighbours at Ford Geelong engine plant walk out on the 26th of September 2016, 350 engine plant jobs gone in a single afternoon. They have built engines they knew no one else would ever build. At 3 p.m. on the 3rd of October 2017, they hit the last one. The engine is a Toyota 2AR FE, 2.5 litre inline 4-cylinder. Iron block, alloy head, 16 valves, variable valve timing. The engine that has powered the Toyota Camry since 2009, the hybrid version driving Kevin Rudd's 2009 Green Shoots photo opportunity at this very plant. David Butner, Toyota Australia's Managing Director since 2013, is on the floor. He does not give a speech. The workers do not applaud. The line stops. The engine will not be sold to a customer. It will be preserved. Toyota will convert the Altona site to a centre of excellence, a training and hydrogen technology facility. It will never cast an engine block again. It will never machine a crankshaft again. It will never assemble a cylinder head again. The building will still stand. The purpose it was built for will not. 50 kilometres southwest, at Norlane in Geelong, the Ford engine plant that closed 12 months earlier is being demolished for redevelopment. Its assembly line, the line that built the Ford Barra i6, one of the great inline 6-cylinder engines of the 21st century, has already been scrapped. Ford Australia's 2016 statement was unambiguous. The tooling will not be sold. The blueprints will not be released. 880 kilometres northeast at Lidcombe in Sydney, the factory that assembled the first Twin Wasp aero engine on the 28th of October 1941. The plant that armed Australia's Pacific War air defence is a retail complex. There is no heritage plaque. But this story does not begin at 3 p.m. on the Altona floor in 2017. It begins 75 years, 11 months and 6 days earlier, with a man who kept a framed motto on his office wall. Chapter 2. I Am Work, May 1940, Melbourne. Prime Minister Robert Menzies appoints Essington Lewis, Managing Director of the Broken Hill Proprietary Company, as Director General of Munitions. Lewis is 59 years old, born the 13th of January 1881, in Barra, South Australia. He has led BHP since 1926. He is the most powerful industrialist in the country. On the wall of his office at Munitions Headquarters in Melbourne, framed in block capitals, I Am Work, the 11th of June, 1940. The Department of Munitions is formally established. Lewis places every Australian machine shop, every foundry, every engineering firm, every aero engine plant on a war footing. Contracts at actual cost plus a margin, usually 10%. No competitive tender, no negotiation. January 1942. Lewis's powers are extended. He becomes Director General of Aircraft Production as well. He now controls both munitions and airframes for the entire Commonwealth war effort. The Australian aero engine plants convert. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, CAC, had been founded in 1936 by Essington Lewis, with W.S. Robinson and Sir Lawrence Hartnett. Its factory at Fisherman's Bend, Port Melbourne, produces de Havilland Gypsy Major aero engines under licence. 130 horsepower, 4-cylinder inline engines for the RAAF's Tiger Moth trainer. But the Beaufort bomber needs something larger. The Bristol Beaufort had originally been specified with the British-built Bristol Taurus engine. Under blitz pressure in 1940, British supply fails. Australia switches to the Pratt and Whitney R1830. Twin Wasp, twin-row radial, 14 cylinders, 1,200 horsepower. The Commonwealth Government builds a purpose-designed engine plant at Lidcombe, New South Wales, off Rookwood Road, fully tooled to license build the Twin Wasp. And this is where it gets genuinely insane. The CAC Lidcombe Twin Wasp engine plant, the factory that would produce the engines defending Australia's northern approaches against the Imperial Japanese Navy, was operated on behalf of the Commonwealth by General Motors-Holden Limited. Read that again. The engine plant that powered the Bristol Beaufort. The engine plant that armed Australia's Pacific War. The engine plant that would deliver its first Twin Wasp on the 28th of October 1941 was operated by General Motors-Holden. The same General Motors that would, 72 years later, decide from Detroit that no GM operation would remain in Australia. Under Managing Director Sir Lawrence Hartnett, GMH ran 2 aero engine plants during the war. Gypsy Major at Fisherman's Bend for the Tiger Moth. Twin Wasp at Lidcombe for the Beaufort. Between 1941 and 1945, CAC Lidcombe produced approximately 870 Twin Wasp engines. Each engine was fully machined, fully assembled, fully tested on an Australian test stand. Every crankshaft, every connecting rod, every valve, every piston, every one of the 870 Twin Wasp engines to power the Beaufort or the Boomerang was assembled by an Australian, tested by an Australian, signed off by an Australian on an Australian factory floor. The Twin Wasps powered 700 Australian-built Bristol Beauforts, the anti-shipping bomber that operated from Milne Bay and Port Moresby, 250 CAC Boomerangs, the interceptor designed by Fred David that operated from Wewak and Cape Gloucester. The CAC Woomera prototype. Lawrence Wackett, CAC's chief engineer, born 1896 in Townsville, Queensland, supervised the engine and airframe programs. John Story, DAP administrator, coordinated across the Beaufort, Boomerang and Wirraway lines. Peak wartime employment across the Australian engine industry, Fisherman's Bend, Lidcombe, Ascot Vale, Geelong Assembly and hundreds of feeder foundries reached approximately 20,000 workers. Women on the shop floor for the first time. Assembling aero engines that would defend Australia against the empire that had bombed Darwin on the 19th of February 1942. 20,000 Australians building engines, in a country that, 75 years later, would build none at all. Lewis retired to BHP in 1946. Hartnett resigned from GMH the same year over Australian content disputes. The Twin Wasp production ended. The tooling was retained, but the capability Lewis had built between June 1940 and June 1945, the machining skills, the casting foundries, the aero engine-trained fitters and turners, the design draftsmen, did not disappear. It converted. Chapter 3. Chifley's Grey Motor, 29th of November 1948, Fisherman's Bend, Port Melbourne, a rainy Monday. The same factory floor that had pressed Beaufort airframes 6 years earlier, the same overhead cranes, the same castings foundry, many of the same workers. Prime Minister Ben Chifley stands beside Harold Bettel, GMH Managing Director. A curtain drops. Behind it, a grey sedan with a Rainer Hoff lion on the boot lid. The Holden 48-215. The FX under the bonnet, the grey motor. 132.5 cubic inches, 2.15 litres, 6 cylinders in line, cast iron block, cast iron head, 3 main bearings. 60 brake horsepower at 3,800 revolutions per minute. The block is painted grey, every one of them. The engine is named for the paint. The grey motor is designed by GMH engineers based on pre-war Chevrolet architecture, but adapted for Australian conditions. Heavier crankshaft for the corrugated dirt roads of the outback. Larger radiator for the summer heat. Higher torque camshaft for the hills. All Australian tooling, all Australian casting, all Australian machining at the Fisherman's Bend plant that had, 6 years earlier, cast Gypsy Major cylinder heads. Sir Lawrence Hartnett, the man who had driven the 48-215 engineering program from the war years, is not there. He resigned from GMH in 1946 over Australian content disputes. Chifley's speech, quoted verbatim in the Argus the following morning. "She's a beauty." The tooling for the grey motor has cost more than 3 million Australian pounds in 1948 currency, approximately $120 million in 2026 money. Every dollar spent in Australia. Every pattern, every jig, every fixture, every gauge Australian made. The nation orders 18,048 215s in the first 6 weeks. Waiting lists stretch to 1952. Every one of them Australian-engined. Grey motor production runs from 1948 to 1963 across the FX, FJ, FE, FC, FB, EK and EJ Holdens. Displacement grows in stages, 132 cubic inches to 138, to 149 to 179 in the last variants. For 15 years, every Holden built in Australia carries a grey motor cast, machined and assembled at Fisherman's Bend. Every Holden built in Australia across those 15 years is powered by an engine designed by Australian engineers for Australian conditions and manufactured entirely on Australian soil. The grey motor is not just an engine. It is a proof of national capability. A country that had produced the Twin Wasps under wartime pressure could, in peace, produce a civilian engine to any international standard. And in 1963, GMH engineers replaced the grey motor with a completely new engine. The red motor, cast, machined and assembled at the same Fisherman's Bend plant, the beginning of an Australian engine design iteration that would run continuously for the next 36 years. Chapter 4. Red Motor, Blue Motor, Black Motor, 1963, Fisherman's Bend. GMH launches the red motor, 149 cubic inches, 6 cylinders in line, painted red instead of grey, Australian designed, Australian cast, Australian machined. The red motor evolves through the 60s and 70s, 149 cubic inches, then 161, then 173, then 186, then 202. In 1969, GMH launches something the country has never made before, the Holden 253 cubic inch V8, 4.2 litres. Pushrod, cast iron, Australian design from the water pump to the intake manifold, followed the same year by the 308 cubic inch 5.0 litres. The Holden V8 becomes an Australian cultural artefact. Peter Brock's Holden dealer, Team Taurana. XSLR 5000, with a 308 tuned to L34 specification, wins Bathurst in 1979 by 6 laps. The Commodore SS Group A of the mid-1980s. The Commodore Vive NSSS from 1988. The Holden Racing Team's championship years to 2000. The engine that carries the Australian muscle car lineage from Warwick Farm to Mount Panorama. 1976. GM Arch launches the Blue Motor. 1980. The Black Motor. Fisherman's Bend is running 4 Australian-designed engine programs simultaneously. The 6-cylinder red variants, the Blue Motor, the Black Motor, and the V8 in 253 and 308 configuration. 50 kilometres southwest, at Ford Geelong Engine Plant on the shores of Corio Bay, where Ford Australia has cast engines since 1960, the Falcon Inline 6 evolves in parallel. 200 cubic inches, 250 cubic inches. The Australian-developed alloy head 6 from 1988. Between them, the Fisherman's Bend and Geelong engine plants employ approximately 7,000 people through the 1970s. Adding Nissan Clayton, Chrysler Adelaide, and the feeder foundries at Ballarat and Bendigo and Melbourne, the Australian engine industry employs approximately 15,000 workers. Every apprentice engine fitter in the country trains on Australian-designed engines. Every foundry apprentice pours Australian-designed castings. But on the 27th of June, 1973, 4 men sit in a Canberra office and draft a paper. Alf Rattigan, chairman of the Tariff Board since 1963, is the senior name. Fred Gruen of the Australian National University, Brian Brogan of Monash, Stuart Harris. The paper recommends a 25% across-the-board reduction in all Australian import tariffs. John Stone, Treasury Secretary, the man responsible for Australia's fiscal architecture, is not in the room. He is not consulted. 21 days later, on the 18th of July 1973, at 7 p.m, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam will act on that paper, and the Australian engine industry will begin the 44-year process of dying. Chapter 5, 18 July, 18th of July, 1973. 7 p.m, Canberra. Prime Minister Gough Whitlam and Trade Minister Jim Cairns announced jointly on national television an immediate 25% across-the-board cut to all Australian import tariffs. Effective midnight. Prime Ministerial Transcript 2971. Each tariff will be reduced by 1/4 of what it is now. This reduction will apply forthwith. Pre-cut passenger vehicle tariff 57.5%. Post-cut 43%. Technically, though, the 25% applied across the board rather than to the category rate directly. The impact on component imports, on engine parts, on machining feedstock is immediate. Within 48 hours, General Motors-Holden stands down approximately 5,000 workers across Fisherman's Bend and Elizabeth. The engine plant reduces from 3 shifts to 2, then to 1, then to short time. Here's the thing, engine tooling does not pivot in 48 hours. The Fisherman's Bend casting bays, the cope and drag boxes, the sand shakeout tables, the induction furnaces are fixed capital. Depreciation is running whether the line is running or not. Once cheaper imported engines are available under the reduced tariff, Australian engine production becomes uneconomic per unit. Because the fixed cost is the same whether you produce 10,000 engines a year or 100,000. The engine plants do not close in 1973. GVMH keeps building red motors and V8s at Fisherman's Bend. Ford keeps building Falcon Inline 6s at Geelong. Nissan builds Bluebird engines at Clayton. Chrysler builds Hemi 6s at Tonsley Park in Adelaide. But every year, more of the components inside each engine are imported. Every year, fewer apprentice engine fitters come through the training pipeline because the TAFE workshops that train them are shrinking. Every year, the design capability atrophies. Between 1973 and 1980, Australian manufacturing employment falls by approximately 80,000 jobs. 1975. The Whitlam government dismissed. The Fraser government takes office. It does not reverse the tariff cut. It does not raise the category rates. It does not restore protection. By 1980, the Australian engine industry is running on legacy capability, designing to standards set in the 60s, iterating on tooling paid for in the 60s, staffed by apprentices trained in the 60s who are now senior tradesmen. Then, in 1983, a Labor senator from Ballarat becomes Minister for Industry, Technology and Commerce. And within 14 months, he will announce the plan that puts a final date on the Australian engine industry. If you've made it this far, through the Twin Wasp production floor at Lidcombe, the grey motor casting bay at Fisherman's Bend, the Bathurst-winning 308 and the 7 p.m. bulletin that stood down 5,000 engine workers in 48 hours. Hit the like button and subscribe. This channel keeps these stories alive. Engine fitter payslip, apprenticeship indenture or Barra service record. Drop it in the comments. Chapter 6, the 30th of May, 1984. The Senate Chamber, Canberra, Wednesday, 30th of May, 1984. Autumn. Industry Minister John Button stands at the dispatch box. He is 51 years old. He has held the portfolio for 1 year and 2 months. He announces the Motor Industry Development Plan, the pre-plan Australian vehicle industry, 5 manufacturers, 13 models, protective tariff at 57.5%. The pre-plan Australian engine industry, 4 engine plants, Fisherman's Bend, Geelong, Clayton, Tonsley Park, employing directly approximately 5,000 engine builders. The plan's targets reduce 5 manufacturers to 3 groups, reduce 13 models to 6, reduce the passenger vehicle tariff from 57.5% to 42.5% by 1984, to 27.5% by 1988, to 15% by 1992. The engine industry effect. Engine plants operating on cost recovery from local sales suddenly face imported engine assemblies at progressively lower protection. Every year, the price differential between an Australian-made engine and a Japanese or Korean imported engine narrows. The margins collapse. 1992. Nissan closes its Clayton, Victoria assembly and engine plant. Full Australian manufacturing exit completed by 1994, approximately 2,000 jobs. First engine plant to close post-Button. By 1999, the Fisherman's Bend V8 line was being phased out in favour of imported General Motors LS Series V8s from Detroit and Kentucky. The Fisherman's Bend V8 line, the line that had cast every 253, every 308, every Bathurst-winning HDT and HSV engine since 1969, was closing. The Australian V8 program ends. 30 years of Australian pushrod V8 design capability discontinued. The tooling is scrapped. The blueprints are archived. The engineers who designed the LX Torana L34, the Commodore SS Group A, and the Holden Racing Team's championship-winning engines are made redundant. But before Fisherman's Bend closes its V8 line, before Ford closes anything, another Australian Labor Prime Minister will stand in the House of Representatives on the 12th of March, 1991, and, in a ministerial statement recorded in Hansard, use the exact word that had never before been spoken by a serving Prime Minister to describe what was being done to Australian manufacturing. Chapter 7. Deliberately and Determinedly. 12th of March, 1991. House of Representatives, Canberra. Prime Minister Bob Hawke delivers the ministerial statement titled Building a Competitive Australia. Hansard verbatim. We have deliberately and determinedly set about pulling down the tariff walls. Read that again. Deliberately and determinedly. Not reluctantly. Not regrettably. Not under external pressure from the International Monetary Fund. Not in response to global market forces. Not because the previous government had left us no choice. Deliberately and determinedly. An Australian Prime Minister, in a formal ministerial statement on the floor of the House of Representatives in Hansard, which is the permanent record of the Commonwealth Parliament, using the word that means with intent. Every subsequent tariff cut, every engine plant closure, every apprenticeship pipeline reduction, every foundry demolition. Documented in Hansard by the man responsible as a deliberate act. 26th of February 1992. Treasurer Paul Keating, soon to be Prime Minister, delivers the One Nation statement. He extends the Hawke tariff schedule through to the year 2000. The passenger vehicle rate is placed on a further downward glide path. Engine components follow. 1997. Prime Minister John Howard freezes the passenger vehicle tariff at 15%. The target button had set 13 years earlier. Howard does not raise it. He does not reverse it. He does not restore protection to engine component imports. He freezes. 3 Prime Ministers, 2 political parties, 1 outcome. 1998. The Productivity Commission Act 2000 comes into force on the 8th of December. The Industries Assistance Commission is replaced. The technical machinery for further tariff review is put in the hands of an agency whose founding purpose is competition and efficiency. 2000. Passenger vehicle tariff at 15%. 2005. 10%. 2010. 5%. The 18th of May, 2005. The Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement, AUSFTA, comes into force. American engine imports enter Australia at zero tariff. Australian engine exports face reciprocal open access to the world's largest vehicle market. But at global scale, the Australian engine industry cannot compete on price with GM Powertrain in the Michigan or Toyota's Georgetown, Kentucky plant. The trajectory is now set. The mathematics is now inevitable. But the last great Australian-designed engine has not yet been built. Chapter 8. The Barra, 2002. Broadmeadows, Victoria, Ford Australia launches the Barra 182 in the BA Falcon, 4-litre inline 6, double overhead camshafts, 24 valves, variable cam timing, iron block, alloy head, designed at Ford Australia's Broadmeadows Engineering Centre over 4 years by an Australian engineering team. The lineage descended from the Ford Falcon inline 6 launched at Ford Geelong Engine Plant in 1960. 42 years of Australian engine iteration, culminating in the Barra. The Barra variants roll out across the Bay BF, Hawke and FGX Falcon platforms. The Barra 182, 182 kilowatts naturally aspirated. The Barra 190 in the Ford Territory SUV. The Barra 240T in the BAXR 6 Turbo, 240 kilowatts factory rated. The Barra 270T in the BFXR 6 Turbo, 270 kilowatts. The Barra 325T in the FGX F6, 325 kilowatts. The Barra 340T in the FGX R6 Turbo, 340 kilowatts. The Barra 351 in the FGX Falcon GTF, 351 kilowatts factory, 449 kilowatts achievable with tuning. Here's the kicker. The Barra was designed to run 400,000 kilometres with routine maintenance. It was designed to accept aftermarket modifications up to 700 kilowatts without failure. It was designed by Australian engineers who understood the Australian conditions the engine would face. Bathurst heat, corrugated Kimberley roads, snowy mountains cold starts, outback Queensland dust. Every metallurgical choice, every port design, every valve angle, Every cam profile reflected 2 decades of Australian engineering intuition about what an engine had to survive on Australian soil. The Barra becomes, quickly and without official promotion, the most swapped engine in the Australian aftermarket. Land Cruiser owners tear out the venerable 1HZ diesel and drop in a Barra 240T. Patrol owners do the same. Hilux ute builders, boat builders, drift car builders, sandrail builders, Sydney to Perth long-haul modifiers. An Australian-designed engine born to power a family sedan ends up in every serious modification built in the country. 26th of September 2016. Ford Geelong engine plant closes. The last Barra IX rolls off the assembly line. Approximately 350 engine plant jobs gone. Named Final Ford Australia. CEO Bob Graziano. Ford 2016 statement. The tooling will not be sold. It will be scrapped. The blueprints will not be released. The Barra program ends after 14 years and approximately 1 million engines. The Australian engineers who designed it retire, retrain or emigrate. 10 years later, in 2026, a running Barra IX in an aftermarket auction sells for between 8,000 and 12,000 Australian dollars, approximately what a running Barra vehicle sold for in 2016. The engine is worth more than the car it came out of, because no one else builds it, because the tooling is gone, because the engineers are gone. Chapter 9. Come Clean. December 2009. Altona, Victoria. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd stands beside a new Toyota Camry hybrid on the Altona line. The photograph shows him gripping a hybrid electric motor casing. The launch is called The Future of Australian Manufacturing. Green jobs, green shoots, green cars. Between 2009 and 2017, Toyota Altona builds 50,296 hybrid engines. But 4 years and 1 day after the Rudd photograph, on the 10th of December 2013, a different man stands in a different chamber. Treasurer Joe Hawke, House of Representatives, Canberra. A matters of public importance debate on the motor vehicle manufacturing industry. Hawke speaks. Hansard records his words. If I was running a business and I was committed to that business in Australia, I would not be saying that I have not made any decision about Australia. Either you are here or you are not. He adds that other Australian industries would want the same assistance the motor vehicle industry received. 24 hours later, the 11th of December 2013, General Motors Detroit announces that Holden Australian manufacturing will end by 2017. Approximately 2,900 direct jobs across Elizabeth and Fisherman's Bend engine production. 10th of February 2014. Toyota Australia announces Altona will close in 2017. Approximately 2,600 direct jobs. Ford Australia had announced 23rd of May 2013 that Broadmeadows and Geelong would close in 2016. Approximately 1,200 jobs across the two sites. Approximately 350 of them engine plant. 3 of the world's 10 largest car makers commit to closing their Australian engine and vehicle plants inside a 9-month window, all in response to a coalition treasurer's dispatch box challenge. 9 days before Hawke's speech, on the 9th of December 2013, Mike Devereaux, Holden chairman, had appeared before the Productivity Commission's public inquiry into automotive manufacturing. His testimony would be cited by the Productivity Commission's final report, number 70, signed by Commissioners Woods and Weichart, as evidence that the industry could not sustain itself without further government assistance. The Productivity Commission's estimate of transitional automotive industry assistance already paid between 1997 and 2012, approximately 30 billion Australian dollars. Prime Minister Tony Abbott's response to the Holden announcement given at a Sydney press conference. A difficult day for Australia. And for 4 years, from December 2013 to October 2017, the Australian engine industry that had begun with the first Twin Wasp at Lidcombe in October 1941 died in a slow, sequenced four-plant cascade. Chapter 10. The Cascade. The engine plants close in order. 27th of March, 2008. The last Mitsubishi 380 engine at Tonsley Park, Adelaide. A 3.5 litre 6G74 V6. Approximately 1,000 jobs. The former Chrysler Australia plant, the plant that had cast Hemi 6s for the Valiant Charger in the 1970s, goes dark. First major engine plant to close in the 21st century, 1992. Nissan Clayton engine plant had closed 16 years earlier, 2,000 jobs, referenced backward, first to go, 1999. Fisherman's Bend V8 line being phased out in favour of imported GMLS series. Australian V8 design ends, referenced. 26th of September 2016. Ford Geelong engine plant closes. Approximately 350 engine plant jobs. Last Barra i6 built. Bob Graziano signs the papers. 3rd of October 2017. Toyota Altona engine plant closes. Approximately 2,600 direct Toyota jobs across engine and assembly. 2,535,963 total engines built across 16 years. 50,296 of them hybrid. David Butner is on the floor. Let that number sit for a moment. 2.5 million engines, 16 years, zero replacement. Here's the thing. Every one of these closure dates was known months in advance. Every one was cleared through corporate boards in Detroit, Aichi or Dearborn. Every one was announced before it happened, protested against by unions and state premiers, debated in the Senate. And every one proceeded on schedule. 20th of October 2017 at 10:45 a.m. Last Holden VF2 Commodore SS5 red line off the Elizabeth line, powered by an imported GM LS3 V8 6 litre. The last Holden built in Australia has not been powered by an Australian-designed engine for 18 years. Between the first Twin Wasp on the 28th of October 1941 and the last Toyota engine on the 3rd of October 2017. 75 years, 11 months and 6 days. 2 Octobers, 76 years, almost to the day. The engine industry that Essington Lewis built between June 1940 and June 1945, that Ben Chifley extended to civilian use in November 1948, that Ford perfected with the Barra in 22 years of iteration from 1994 to 2016, no longer exists. And on the 11th of January, 2024, 6 years, 3 months and 8 days after the last Holden, the John Hine and Son machine tool foundry that had built the tooling for the grey motor, the red motor, the blue motor, the black motor, the Falcon Inline 6 and the Barra i6 signed voluntary liquidation papers in Sydney. The tooling maker for the Australian engine industry outlived the Australian engine industry by 6 years, 3 months and 8 days. Chapter 11. 2 Octobers. Walk into the Toyota Motor Corporation Australia Centre of Excellence at Altona today. Turn left past the entrance. The former engine plant assembly line has been converted to a training facility. Toyota certified apprentices, Australian apprentices, learn to service Toyota vehicles imported from Japan, Thailand and other Toyota manufacturing bases. They do not learn to build engines. They cannot. There is no engine casting bay left in Australia. There is no engine machining line left in Australia. There is no engine assembly line left in Australia. 50 kilometres southwest, at Nor Lane in Geelong, the Ford engine plant where the last Barra i6 rolled off on the 26th of September 2016 has been substantially cleared for redevelopment. The tooling was scrapped. The site is subject to redevelopment. 880 kilometres away at CAC Lidcombe, the factory that built the first Twin Wasp on the 28th of October 1941, the site is a retail complex. There is no heritage plaque. Fisherman's Bend, the plant that cast the grey motor, the red motor, the blue motor, the black motor, and the Holden V8 across half a century of Australian passenger car engine design, is a defence innovation precinct. Tonsley Park in Adelaide, where the last Mitsubishi 380 V6 was cast in March 2008, is a business incubator. Not one of these sites carries a marker indicating what was made there. Not one carries a plaque naming the men who worked there. Lesson 1. They deliberately did it. On the 12th of March 1991, Prime Minister Bob Hawke stood in the House of Representatives and confessed, in a formal ministerial statement recorded in the parliamentary Hansard, "We have deliberately and determinedly set about pulling down the tariff walls, not reluctantly, not regrettably, not under external pressure, deliberately and determinedly." 19 years later, on the 10th of December 2013, an Australian Treasurer stood in the same chamber and told General Motors to either be committed to Australia or leave. 24 hours later, GM Detroit left. The pattern is Hansard. The pattern is bipartisan. The pattern is documented. They did not accidentally destroy the Australian engine industry. They did it deliberately. Lesson 2. You cannot import institutional memory. The Ford Barra i6 was, by any global measure, one of the finest inline six-cylinder engines ever manufactured. It ran 400,000 kilometres with routine maintenance. It accepted aftermarket modifications up to 700 kilowatts without failure. 10 years after the last, Barra rolled off the Geelong engine plant line on the 26th of September 2016. A used Barra engine in Australia sells for between $8,000 and $12,000, more than the running vehicle it came out of. The Barra is the most swapped engine in Australian four-wheel drive circles. It is in Land Cruisers, Patrols, Hiluxes, boats, drift cars, sandrails. Because no one else builds it. Because Ford scrapped the tooling. Because the engineers who designed it retired. Because the apprentices they would have trained were never trained. You cannot import the Australian engineering team that designed the Barra. That team is gone. Lesson 3. The engines that armed us in 1942 are now made by no one we know. In October 1941, a factory at Lidcombe, operated by General Motors-Holden, delivered the first Australian-built Twin Wasp aero engine. 870 Twin Wasps followed across the war. They powered the Bristol Beauforts that flew from Milne Bay and Port Moresby. They powered the CAC boomerangs that flew from Wewak and Cape Gloucester. They defended the northern approaches of Australia. 75 years, 11 months and 6 days later, the last Toyota engine built on Australian soil rolled off the Altona line. Between those two dates, an Australian nation built engines for its own defence and its own transport. After those two dates, it did not. The engines in Australian cars in 2026 are cast in Aichi, Nagoya, Shanghai, Nagasaki, Detroit, Kentucky and Ulsan. The engines in Australian aircraft in 2026 are cast in East Hartford, Connecticut and Derby, England. The country that armed itself against the Empire of Japan with its own aero engines cannot, in 2026, cast an engine block on its own soil. 28th of October 1941, 3rd of October 2017, read that again. 2 Octobers, 76 years almost to the day. The Twin Wasp at Lidcombe, the grey motor at Fisherman's Bend, the Falcon in Line 6 at Geelong, the Holden V8 at Fisherman's Bend, the Ford Barra i6 at Geelong, the Toyota 2ARFE at Altona, 6 engines, 2 centuries, 1 country, 0 remaining engine plants, 75 years, 11 months and 6 days. The country that built its own engines to defend itself in 1942 has, in 2017, stopped building engines at all. She's a beauty.